the voice of Job Seekers podcast. My name is Mark, and I have been your host for almost 11 years now. How about that? Long time. This LinkedIn Live is dedicated to job scams, of course. I wondered if you guys had enough of these job scams like I have, and I'm not even the traditional worker, but I get them too. So I'm trying to avoid them, and Craig has already affirmed that he's avoiding them too. And welcome to the show, Craig Fisher. He is one of those talent acquisition pros. In fact, he considers himself, or he is a fractional talent acquisition leader, fractional CMO, talent acquisition communications lead consultant for several different companies. And I made that a little short because you might have something else, because you have a lot of different roles. So I don't want to tell you to just one thing. But I appreciate you coming on the show because I saw your podcast called Hiring Humans, which I also think there's a book called Hiring Humans that you love, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yep. And it's grateful to have you here. Definitely has a very public type of role. Would you say? I don't want to use influencer because that's
Yeah, it's a creepy term.
Yeah, I don't like it.
I don't like it, but I am a bit of a public figure, and some of that's by design, and some of it's just because I'm old and have been doing it so long.
Yeah, and you got a whole book and a whole podcast and a bunch of webinars and presentations that you've done. So you're no stranger, and we're well connected and got lots of things in common with all that. But this is like the second or third time we got a chance to talk person to person.
That's right.
Cool. So I'm interested in, and let me just qualify all of this. There's two podcasts that are going to be simulcasting on. One is the Voice of Job Seekers. The other one is the Job Scam Report, which is a dedicated job scam podcast just for Substack. So in order to get that, you have to apply or subscribe to the Job Scam Report. This will be a public podcast. Some of them are going to be private, so they'll be behind a paywall for those who are listening for the first time or the second time, because I just started it in May, but we'll leave that for right now. But I am interested in your thoughts because on your podcast, Hiring Humans, you guys talked about how people are getting job scammed and some of the experiences they faced. I want to talk about the employer side. I don't think hardly anybody's talking about how scams are affecting employers, and maybe, in general, I'm asking, are they having to move the goalposts? Are they having to make shifts and changes around? And is it going to affect for the long term how people apply to jobs? But people are sick of trying to figure out LinkedIn and then going to a site that seemed like it was real, but it's really fake and that whole thing. And I know people need to do their thing, but
Mhm.
how about employers? What kind of conversations are being had that you can talk about where it's affecting them and what people should try to understand?
So employers face a lot of obstacles when it comes to posting their jobs in the first place, right?
Mm.
There's an apparatus called the applicant tracking system, which job seekers are very familiar with these days. That's where supposedly your resume goes to be ghosted. If you apply to a job, your resume goes to this applicant tracking system, and in theory, it has intelligent automation that edges you out of the running because you don't match well enough. And so most of that's a myth, right? Most of that's not actually true, but out of the back end of the ATS comes an XML feed. This is the data that goes to job boards and out to Google when you want to get your jobs posted on places like Indeed and LinkedIn and other places that use a feed in order to scrape your jobs. And
Mhm.
so there are all these tiny little scammer companies that will take your job feed, scrape your job posts, and post them themselves and charge applicants to apply to a job, claiming that they'll get that job seeker better positioning or better placement within that organization. And none of that's true either. And so anytime you see something that just looks a little bit off. Some weird website is posting a job for a well-known organization. They are pirating that feed and trying to charge people to apply to it. So that's one issue that traditionally employers have faced.
Mhm.
Google for Jobs was trying to fix that. I'm not sure it didn't make it worse. And then there are plenty of other things, right? So if you're a fairly new employer, like a startup, you run the risk of job seekers thinking that maybe you're fake because you haven't been in business very long, right? So I'm facing an issue like that right now with a startup that I'm working with. And we developed a new website for the company and they wanted to get rid of all the old blog posts. I said, well, hold on a minute, time out. If you do that and you've got this shiny new website, there's no legacy content there. Your company's been around for 4 years. How's
Mhm.
anyone going to know how long you've really been in business by looking at your page?
And there's so
And
many
so
layers to there's so many I was gonna say there's so many layers to that, but how will people tell the difference between what's real and what's not real if you don't have something to show that you're interested in someone else's business, but also show that there's a track record?
And that's where employer branding comes into play, right? So
Mhm.
intentionally, you should lay breadcrumbs for job seekers to understand organically more about your organization so that they can do their research and have a better opportunity to be a culture fit and opt into that job properly. So layers is right. There's a lot to it. And so
Mhm.
it's great to have a nice, clean, bare bones website, but if you don't give the job seeker enough to go on, or investors or customers, then you run the risk of being too shallow, even if it's shiny.
Sure. And scammers are able to do that anyway, right? They're able to duplicate it. And
Absolutely.
well, not only that, but they'll even almost spell it the same way, except for maybe one letter because they need to get the address,
That's right.
for which they could do it anyway. So for most people's eyes, they look at, let's say, Microsoft.com, and there's an extra F in the Microsoft. That's going to be pretty much fake because
Right.
an address is an exact thing. But a website is also an exact representation, supposed to be.
Well,
So you just,
but anyone could create an email address or a URL that is Microsoft.somethingelse.com, right?
but if
It's
but
what
they'll
goes
charge you spell it
dot
because
com.
they need to.
The dot something else is where you go crazy, right? So it could
Yeah.
be Microsoft spelled correctly, dot my hat is on my head right now, dot com.
Mhm.
But it's the last part that is the scam URL. So you've got to be wary
Right.
of what comes just before the dot com also, in addition to all those wacky spellings that happen. And
Right.
everybody misspells Google even sometimes, and you land on a really weird page.
That's right.
Uh,
And that's not to say that there's human error. And I think in our eyes and what we see is you say, oh, it's just misspelled this one time. But they'll get some communication with that extra F in the song.
that's
And
right.
they'll automatically think that's the real deal. Oh, Microsoft is calling,
Yeah.
instead of realizing if you just took that part of the URL and put it in Google, it's gonna come up with something else other than Microsoft.
I've had scammers, Mark, try to hit me up years apart. Same scammers, same
Yeah.
keywords, same weird invoice numbers and things like that,
Mhm.
like 3 years apart. But it's the same organizations. And I've been told
Mhm.
before by a friend of mine that is a cyber detective, real thing. He's a real cyber detective,
Mhm.
that the organizations are Russian syndicates and things like that.
Mhm.
It's not an individual trying to scam you. This is an organized effort. And once you are ensnared, it's difficult to get out. And very often there's no help to be had from the authorities, or who is the authority? What are you going to do? So you got to be very careful what you click on nowadays. If there's an
Yes.
attachment from something that looks
Yes.
suspicious, do not click on that. If someone's representing themselves as wanting you to do a project for their employer that's in another country,
Mhm.
be very suspicious of that. And I'm in a odd position of being one of these fractional people that has had my own business for many years. I
Mhm.
also do jobs as a W-2 employee
Yeah.
for some big companies, reputable companies from time to time, and sometimes some smaller organizations as well. And I do contracts for these companies too. And so I'm constantly on the search for gigs and deals and partnerships and things like that. And so I'm a good target for scammers that are offering these sort of fractional things. And so even just the nature of having fractional in my profile on LinkedIn leaves me open to some of that scamability. And so I've got to be very vigilant myself, and I'm constantly on the lookout for this. And I get hit up every week by something that looks like a scam, it seems like.
Going back to employers real quick, and that's very good. And we can probably have a whole hour show breaking down that little 3-minute spiel that you just gave about,
Mhm.
watching and being vigilant and noticing different ways scammers are trying to hit. Because I've been saying lately, they get you before they got you.
That's right.
And what I mean often is that they have, being that you brought up, they hit you years ago. And it confirms what I've heard from other cybersecurity professionals and people who've been doing it for years, is that a lot of the information they have already, when they talk to you, they're just confirming you're still at that phone number, still at that address, and
That's
still
right.
working that same job, because they already have maybe more than 90% of what they really need,
They
except
got your
for
information in a data breach somewhere. That's right.
exactly, except your phone number, your social security number, and those
Or
kind of
possibly
things
your
is what they
password.
really want.
That's right.
They use money to get to where they really want is the data.
Right.
So that's why a lot of people are just getting scammed. Somebody said, "I got scammed $2,000." No, it cost you more than that, because you gave them your social security number and some medical information, which is also a very dangerous thing to give out these days. And even we can go on about that. But all that to say is that employers, in your estimation, and I've been saying this in some of the articles I've written lately, but employers need to take more action to prevent, not just for the job seekers, but also to prevent their brand. You go to a company like NVIDIA, which I was just talking with someone on another line. NVIDIA, they have a whole page of what their process is. So if somebody purchases, say, I'm from NVIDIA, then you should go to that page saying, that's a little bit different. Even though the argument might be, this is a special case, it's not that special where you're going to get something they're telling everybody to get, right?
That's right. And a lot of big employers are starting to do that now, put
Mhm.
a little bit of a what to expect page together for the job
Yeah,
seeker. And so not only does it give transparency to the process, and it helps with the feeling of being ghosted, right? To expect a delay between this step and this step, right? Because there's
right.
just time to review and things like that. So it's very helpful to have that transparency and to go to that level. And especially because anyone can say on LinkedIn, I am a third party recruiting agency recruiting for NVIDIA if they want
Hmm.
to. And it's very simple for anyone to create a job application form that looks very
Yes.
realistic, right? And what are you uploading to that? You're uploading a PDF or a Word document that has your phone number, your email address, your mailing address. Watch what you put on those documents, ladies and
Hmm.
gentlemen. Your name is good enough, and not your full name, just the name you go by. They don't need any other information, because if you use background screening services and you search yourself, you'll see all the different variations and possibilities. These syndicates and scammers don't know any more about it than you do right up front. They don't actually know you, they're just guessing. And so
Right.
don't give them more information than they already need. Once you
Yeah.
confirm that the organization is real and the opportunity is legitimate, then that's a different story. But you have to make sure. Talk to a human usually helps.
Yeah. And that's probably the key. A lot of people don't want to do that, because most people that the, let me start from here and I'll try to make this real concise. For years, scammers use social engineering tactics. right? Because they know your behavior, they
That's
know
right.
how you act. So they know that people mass apply to jobs and not intentional, not trying to find out, research first and make sure who are the key people they need to contact and all that. So they are looking, they know that most people will mass apply. They don't remember who they contact because so it's easy for them to say, you filled out an application on Indeed. Now, if you've been on Indeed, you applied to 100, then you're likely to believe them as opposed to you never do. So that's a big deal. But I think a lot of people and the public are slowly finding out how much vigilance is actually involved. But I'm hoping in the long term that people will job search in a much more strategic and thoughtful way will be the
Right.
end game. I'm hoping that'll be the
Mhm.
case. I don't know if it'll end up being that way.
So one of the things that we can go back to the applicant tracking system issue,
Mhm,
one of the things that employers are facing is more and more their careers page and jobs are hosted on someone else's server, right?
mhm,
So it's going to be the applicant tracking systems server a lot of times. And so it's going to be NVIDIA dot whatever applicant tracking system.com. Okay.
mhm.
So let's just say Greenhouse or iSIMS. There are several big ones, Workday, right? Wherever that site might be hosted, if you as the employer have not taken the steps to host that feed on your own site, then the job seeker again has to just beware. And that's another thing that's real easy to just slightly misspell, right? A reputable
Mhm,
ATS. Take the whatever.com, highlight that, copy it, paste it into a Google search and look for reputable scores and things like that. Any complaints of scams
mhm.
from that website, and just double check because, once again, anyone can do that. Very often now, I'd say at least 50% of the time, a company's jobs are not hosted on their own server. And so it's getting trickier and trickier for the job
Yeah.
seeker to confirm that.
Yeah. They look more real all the time. And just as we talked before, it's happening on all levels of professions, even people we consider that might be people of like middle to upper executives. Everybody's taking a hit somewhere along the line because these things are meant to look so real as close as they
That's right.
can to the real deal. Lots of people have very intelligent people are getting fooled, not just people who may not be tech savvy.
That's right. And there's a big push right now for employers to update their job descriptions. So this is happening in mass
Mhm.
all over. My team, my fractional team at TalentNet Media, is currently rewriting all the job descriptions for the world's largest bank. I can't name names on this one,
Understand?
but we're rewriting, updating the marketing language and the responsibilities and everything for
Mhm.
these jobs. So you can't rely on like legacy language and things like that in a
Mhm.
job description to tell if it's real or if it's old or if it's new. And with OpenAI and GPTs, it's very easy to mimic a company's voice and
Yep.
right and the way they talk about themselves and
Mhm.
responsibilities of their jobs and do it at scale. So this company that we're doing this work for, they have 13,000 jobs
Mhm.
uh, online. And so you can imagine a massive effort would have to be done in order to replicate that.
Mhm.
But I think there are situations where organizations are trying to get job seekers to fall for that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think one more thing, and I'm going to get you out of here on this because I think it's pretty important. And I just lost my train of thought. You made me think of it, and I talked about it a lot. But I think companies are, how should I say it? w- What comes across, especially the bigger the companies, the less apathetic they are towards the way that the things that job seekers have to go through to apply and to get to find out. And I understand that, yeah, they got to do research. Yeah, they got to be good preparation. But I think a lot of them are not realizing how important it is that they need to take some responsibility too, making sure that their brand isn't going to be disrupted because of something that they had nothing to do with. Could be quite annoying, and for them, it cost them millions of dollars to try to litigate it.
One of the things that I advocate for on a regular basis, just to ensure that the job seeker is getting a good candidate experience when they apply to jobs with your
Mhm.
organization, is to apply to your own jobs, right? First, go search for them. If
Yes.
there are a whole bunch of companies usurping your feed and trying to direct job seekers off to a different place to apply to your job, pay for it, or something like that, there's
Mhm.
things you can do about that, right? If your jobs don't show up very well, that means that maybe your jobs are getting spit out of your applicant tracking system with old metadata attached to it, and they look old to the machines, right? To Indeed and to Google. And so they're not showing up very well. And that's a bad sign for you as well. But also, right, how do they show up? Where do they show up? Is it easy to apply to? Is it too easy to apply to? Are you not asking the right knockout questions? And does it look legit? That's something we now have to consider. How legit does this process look? And how long does it take to get a response? Right? All of these things can be red flags to job seekers who are wary of getting scammed right now.
Mm. That's very interesting. There is something I thought about is this was one of my original premises on understanding, trying to understand there is a gray line between fake jobs and ghost jobs, depending upon what
That's
your
right.
definition of what ghost jobs actually is. And everybody has a different perspective, but the one I'm talking about where companies do posts to bloviate their lists of candidates that's available, assuming that's one of the common uses of it. What do companies do with that data as far as being that it's not a real job, but they're collecting some personal data?
So most employers are not bad actors in this regard, right? They are,
And that's assuming so. That's
yeah,
fair.
they are building their bench or their list for sure. But what we call those are evergreen jobs, right? So there's always going to be a warehouse job open for Amazon, right? So that's an evergreen job that they're just going to constantly collect resumes for. But most of these organizations have privacy policies that they post publicly that discuss what happens to your data. And we won't sell your data. We will use your data with the best intentions in mind and things like that. But there's there are two sides to this. So mostly job seeker data gets put into an applicant tracking system and then nothing happens to it. It might get searched occasionally
Mhm.
within the system by a recruiter searching for candidates who have applied previously. There are sometimes what we call an email that goes out to wake the dead, right? This means your list has gone cold and it's old data, and we're trying to
Right.
see who's still available from this list. There is another scenario where there's software that will go through and update contact information from open web sources.
Mhm.
And that's actually a very good practice. And then you send out basically another opt in email to say, hey, are you still there? Or SMS campaign as well. And then the last thing is there might be a data breach of that organization, and
Yes.
there your data sits. Some employers and some applicant tracking system makers are now saying you can only keep this here for up to 12 months or something like that. And
Mhm.
then we're purging it. And so that's making its way into what the future of this might be.
And that's a very, and that's good to know. And that's very educational. I think some of the fears are that some companies actually sell the data that they collect, and there's some fear of that. But there have been some breaches, like, and you probably heard this a couple of months over in Asia,
Yeah,
where they called resume looters, and they were able to get what was on the job portal. And
that's
that's
right.
just the job portal right now. But there were, I guess they said they got 30 million pieces of affected 30 million people over in Asia, which is big here, small there. But my conjecture is that what happens over there eventually will happen over here. if there's a lack of regard for people's personal information.
Also, a lot of the sourcing teams that large staffing companies and employers will use are located in the Philippines or
Mhm,
right abroad. And
mhm.
so just because the data breach happened in Asia doesn't mean it didn't affect US customers.
Customers, and that I didn't think about it that way, but now that I know that it is I call it a pandemic. The job scams are a pandemic.
That's right.
It's very much people try to argue with me whether it's an endemic and pandemic. I'm going with pandemic right now, but
It's
let it
certainly
go.
a scourge and a blight. I agree with you.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Craig, thank you very much. If people want to get your book or want to know more about you, where should they contact?
And a real easy place to go is hiring-humans.com.
Excellent. And also they can reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. If you've got questions for me, just reach out and I will gladly answer.
I
I'm
hope
good to be
people will.
friends with there.
I hope people will have that access to you. Thank you very much for the rest of you who watched our program here. This is very informative. Like I said, this is going to be on the Voice of Job Seekers podcast coming up here in the next week or two. And then there will also be one on the Job Scam Report uh, podcast. And if you have to subscribe to that, definitely will, because that's all dedicated to to job scams. So if you are interested in just hearing that, you'll have the whole interview over there on that particular platform. Eventually, it may make place to others. We'll see. But thank you very much. Thank you again, Craig, for coming on. The rest of you, peace and the value of love. I'll see you next time.